Kia ora, everyone. My name's Carl Leducq. I'm on the board of the NZGDA and I'm helping to facilitate this webinar today. Hardly facilitate, I'll be handing it over to Amy from New Zealand On Air very shortly, and they'll be giving an excellent presentation all about the GDSR, Game Development Sector Rebate, that was announced earlier this year. Very exciting times. Lots of questions have emerged from studios and developers since it was announced, which is very exciting. And hopefully today, a lot of those questions will be answered. You might have questions that come up. I have no doubt that you will. So please put your questions in the chat. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A where we can ask New Zealand On Air directly and get some answers. But please know that these questions, likely some of them have already been asked and are in the process of being answered offline. We are putting together FAQs that will be shared and put on New Zealand On Air's side, as well as the NZGDA have a website URL, nzgda.com/GDSR, which will contain all of the information as it gets developed, including this webinar. It's going to be recorded, put on our YouTube channel, as well as shared on the nzgda.com/GDSR website, as well as any FAQs, any new information, as well as any other webinars that we do in the next few months leading up to the first round next year. So even things around election times, any questions that you have around changes, the best place to go will be the nzgda.com/GDSR website URL. Also, just a couple quick things. Regarding NZGDA, thank you everyone for your patience post NZGDC. We are busy still getting the conference videos online, and I just want to say thank you for everyone's patience as we work with Takina to get those videos done and uploaded. So you'll hear from us soon on that, as well as the NZGDA board elections open later this week. If you're interested in being on the board for the next financial year or next year/2 years, depending on which role you want to run for, those will be opening up soon. So keep an eye on your emails or reach out to someone from the NZGDA if you want to hear more. That's all I have to say. I'll give a quick karakia and then hand it over to Amy. Tukua te wairua kia rere ki ngā taumata, hai arahi I a tātou mahi, me tā tātou whai I ngā tikanga a rātou mā, kia mau, kia ita, kia kore, ai e ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamamaua, kia tina, huie, takie.
Thank you.
Really appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I'd like to pass it over to Amy to get started. So thank you everyone. Questions in the chat if anything pops up.
Kia ora. Can I get a thumbs up if that is showing full screen and clearly for everyone? The top slide? Perfect. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Amy Mills taku ingoa, ko ahau te tumuaki o ngā take putia ki Irirangi te motu. My name's Amy Mills and I'm the Head of Funding at New Zealand On Air. Just wanted to give it upfront mihi to Joy and Carl for hosting us on the webinar, and actually for also allowing us to kind of lean on you for a lot of support in terms of connecting in as a sort of funnel or way to broadcast out to the games industry, and also hats off for what was a really stellar New Zealand Game Developers Conference. We sent down a whole contingent of New Zealand On Air employees, staff, because a lot of us are kind of connecting into the sector for the first time, and it was it was incredibly exciting, and we feel deeply privileged that we were selected by MB to be the service provider helping to administer this rebate, which I know was incredibly hard fought for by the sector for quite a number of years, and lots of work went into it, and we've kind of come in at the tail end of that, so it's been really exciting for us. So this is kind of one of the first big moments where we're kind of wanting to share the progress in terms of where we're at. We want to move through the slides relatively quickly to try and ensure that we have time for Q&A at the end, but if that sort of lengthens out while we're sharing, and if we run out of time, just know that we will absolutely be keen to have one-on-one conversations. There'll probably be further opportunities to do more wānanga with straight kind of Q&A sessions as well, so we'll get through what we can. But really the purpose of this session was a bit of a 101 at a high level, because we've now been working on this for a few months, but we are building it as we fly it, and it's happening at pace. And so there will probably be some areas that might not have the level of specificity yet that I know people are asking for and seeking. So it's just to sort of let you know, we wanted to share where we're at in terms of what kind of decisions and what's been locked in, but there will still be some areas that we are speaking really closely to the sector on and still refining. But yes, primary reason was to kind of take you through where we're at, and also very keen to introduce the team so you could put some names and faces together and know who to go to when you need to speak to. So I've introduced myself. I might, Suzanne, if you just say a quick hello so your thumbnail pops up.
Kia ora, tātou.
So Suzanne's our senior communications advisor. She's our point person on everything that's going out externally to the sector, comms-wise. So she'll talk you through some of the work that's being done there and how to kind of stay abreast of everything that's happening as it gets rolled out. And Connell?
Kia ora koutou katoa.
So Connell's our business affairs advisor legal, and Connell he'll jump in and talk a little bit about some of the documents that have already been up on the website that you might have seen, things like our terms of trade. So kind of in that space around legal and contracting, Connell kind of provides some guidance and is a key lead. And then Luke.
Kia ora koutou.
So some of you will have met Luke. Luke and I have been in the trenches the last couple of weeks speaking to lots of the game studios in relation to the pilot phase process. And Luke's probably tired of me saying this, but he's a deep and avid gamer, probably more so than anyone else in the organisation. So when we were commissioned to deliver the rebate, Luke put his hand up immediately to say that he was keen to be involved. So he's going to be probably a person that the sector will interface with a huge amount, especially looking at kind of eligible expenditure and working with applicants towards their final application. And then we've got Christina.
Kia ora koutou.
And Christina's corporate services coordinator, and she will be critically manning the inbox. And so when you're sending queries in, Christina's manning those in particular, but she's also been instrumental in setting up the portal and working on how we get the general registration working. So if you've got key questions around getting in there and registering, etc., Christina's the go-to for that. And then lastly, we've got Wei Ping.
Oh.
And so Wei Ping's our Associate Head of Corporate Services. She will be working most closely with Luke and our Program Coordinator in particular, which I'll just talk to because there's two roles we're recruiting for, and will probably be most heavily involved around payments processing and reviewing and assessing of eligible expenditure as well. And then those two roles that we've got up there, the Program Director and the Program Coordinator, I think actually submissions for those jobs closed yesterday. So we're in the process of longlisting and hoping to do interviews in the next couple of weeks. Just worth highlighting that, you know, the team I've just introduced, all specialists and experts in terms of public funding and administering public funds, but probably not necessarily in terms of game specialism and expertise. So we were incredibly conscious that it's critical that we have, particularly at that program director role, ideally someone who lives and breathes game development, understands game development methodology, and can really speak and engage with the sector with a lot of knowledge and skills. And then in terms of the program coordinator, similarly, like hyper-organised individual, they'll be working very closely into the director. And I think, again, they'll be similar to Luke, where they're doing a lot of engaging with applicants and having a lot of conversations in the lead up to final applications if that's needed to get quality applications coming into us. So that's the team. The other things we wanted to cover at a high level, kind of talk about the flow of the year for the GDSR in terms of year one. Suzanne will take us through key documents that are currently up on the website, soon to be released, because I think that's a really great shorthand and way for people to kind of dive into the detail of where we're at with the GDSR and kind of get your head around things. Luke will talk a little bit around that financial reporting, but again, it'll probably be quite high level at this stage. It'll almost be kind of outlining the types of conversations we're having with the sector and kind of the things still to refine and figure out. Christina and I will actually to kind of step you through the general registration form with a bit more detail, because it's one portal, so it's just wanting to make sure you're clear what you're applying for and where you go to do that. I want to speak just briefly about other government funding in relation to game development alongside the GDSR, and Wei Ping will give a bit of an oversight around how we might monitor and do spot auditing of applications, so that you're kind of conscious of how we're managing the kind of risk framework around the rebate. And then lastly, Suzanne will talk a little bit about accreditation, because that's already been something we've had a few part-time questions about from the sector, and then we'll throw to questions as well. So the flow chart, the kind of the process that we're looking at, this is in our general guidelines document, so you may already be familiar with it. Just thought it was worth actually stepping through each of the 10 steps with a little bit more detail. So the first step being that you actually, and this is open on the website currently, you register as an eligible business, creating eligible games under the guidelines around the GDSR. And that general registration form that's up there currently is what we're thinking of as kind of part one. So we want to gather enough information that we can reasonably say you meet the eligible definitions that are provided, but we're not asking for a huge amount more detail at that point, because we don't want to, essentially we don't want to waste people's time. So if you don't meet, someone hasn't quite read the guidelines properly, for example, and comes in saying, yep, we think we're eligible and we want to get the rebate for a gambling game, you were able to say, actually, you don't meet the eligible requirements at that stage and there's a decline. So that's step two. We determine if what's been provided is eligible, and there'll be a confirmation given. Those that are then eligible to proceed essentially go into a part two of the general registration. And that is what step 4 is. So that's where we'll ask for a little bit more detail from applicants, and that's the 30 November deadline that we're talking about. The reason for that stage is that it's really important for us to have a sense of the estimated eligible expenditure that eligible applicants will be asking for at the end of the eligible period, so the end of 31st March, what they'll be applying for. Those of you who are quite familiar with the GDSR already will know that there's a $40 million cap that can be administered within the year, the first year. And so we just need to be able to, as clearly as possible, understand what the call on that 40 million is likely to look like. So there's a sort of, so there'll be more detail sought at that step 4. Step 5, and we're hoping this will happen pre-Christmas, is that then the applicants will get a letter of acknowledgement sent from us that said that all looked clear what you provided, and that would be signed for. And that, for those who might be a little bit familiar with the screen rebate, that it's akin to a provisional certificate, but it does function, it's different. It functions differently for the GDSR, and it doesn't guarantee that you will receive the amount that you're estimating that you'll submit, but it gives you an indication that the detail and information you've provided is accurate at that stage, and that you will be able to progress to a final application after 31st March. Then step 6 is a slightly unique step, and I've got a slide following this to talk briefly about it, but it's where the eligible applicant would undertake what we're calling a statement of readiness in preparation for the final application. So I'll talk briefly to that in the next slide. Step 7 is when post 31st March, final application will be submitted to NZGDA no later than the 30th of April. And that 30th of April deadline has been pushed out from the deadline of I think we'd put the 19th of April in the design features document. We'd had further conversations with the sector around the timeframes and the feasibility of putting the final application into us. So that's why it's been pushed out to the 30th of April at the latest point. Then we hit step 8, which is where NZGDA will do the application assessment. And then there'll be either a confirmation for the applicant. There's sort of 3 ways it could play out. Most likely there'll be an approved application. There may be instances where some final eligible expenditure incurred and submitted at the final application stage is deemed ineligible. So there might be a partial kind of payout in terms of eligible expenditure. And actually also if because it's a capped yearly amount, highly unlikely in the first year, but if there was an overall ask that exceeded the available funding, then there would be a pro rata scenario, and that would see people equitably having a kind of pro rata, so a partial payout on that basis. Or in very rare circumstances, there might be a declined decision. The purpose of having done the general registration and asking applicants to say, this is what we estimate we'll be asking for, this is the estimated eligible expenditure, should make it highly unlikely that anything materially changes such that there would be a declined application. But there is always the edge case that might happen. And then money flows out the door following that point. So then if I briefly touch on the statement of readiness, and it's one of those areas where, because it's unique to, from my understanding, it's unique to New Zealand. I've been looking around at other jurisdictions and it doesn't seem they have quite this mechanism in place. And partly this was born out of having had a lot of conversations with different jurisdictions and the question that we asked was, what did you wish that you'd known in year one as administrators and administrators of the rebate funding? And universally they said, we underestimated that there were quite a few applicants who just met the minimum threshold expenditure, and in New Zealand's case that's $250,000. That actually didn't have a lot of robust systems in place for determination of eligible expenditure, how costs might be apportioned, etc. We wish we had known that earlier, because then we could have provided a much greater level of support and guidance for applicants then when they're putting their final application in. So the current conversations we've been having with the sector is that this statement of readiness process, it's not a pass or fail. You will have been confirmed as an eligible applicant at this point, but then after you've had your letter of acknowledgement, following that will be the requirement to go through a statement of readiness process. It's likely that will be relatively light touch, especially for some of the studios that have all their systems in place, and the way we're currently looking at it, but we will confirm this with the sector and provide really good information around this so you're clear on what it will entail. It's likely it will be some kind of a checklist that says these systems are in place, and for ones in which there are maybe not those systems in place, there'll be a bit of a narrative provided to NZ On Air that just then gives us the line of sight that means we can support those applicants towards getting a quality application in post 31st March. And I will hand across now, take a breather, and get Suzanne to talk us through some of the key documents and information we've got up on the site and what else is to come.
Great, thanks, Amy. So Suzanne Tokuingoa. As Amy said, I'm the Senior Comms Advisor for New Zealand On Air. So I'll be the one sending out a lot of the communications from our team to the sector about the Game Development Sector Rebate and making sure our webpage has everything you need to access. So for background information on the rebate, for registration, application, and anything else. So the first protocol is our website, so nzonair.gov.nz, and then you can go to the funding tab and find Game Development Sector Rebate. Also, the direct URL is just there on the screen for you as well. So on the webpage, you can find the process flowchart that Amy just talked through then, a timeline, as well as a section titled Resources to Apply and a How to Apply section. So if we start with the Resources to Apply section, this is where you'll find the GDSR guidelines for a start. The guidelines cover off all the details on eligibility, which is where you'll want to begin, as well as then explaining in detail the registration process that includes the letter of acknowledgement and statement of readiness that Amy was just mentioning, and you'll be hearing more about shortly. Also the application process, plus some other requirements around auditing and the like. So as I say, this is a good place to start. It's important to note that the guidelines will be updated as we go through the fine-tuning of the rebate process, as Amy said, flying this as a, flying it
building it as we fly it.
That's it, building it as we fly it, thank you. So we'll absolutely keep you informed when there are updates to those guidelines. You can also find in this resources section the GDSR financial information and eligibility expenditure document. So this will give a good overview of the type of financial information you need to provide, as well as a checklist of what costs will be and also won't be eligible. So Luke, I believe, will talk about that a little bit soon in more detail. So the how to apply section on our webpage should be quite obvious, I hope, and that'll take you straight to the registration portal. As Amy said, she and Christina will soon give you a bit of a walk through that portal, so you'll know a bit more about what to expect and how it's laid out, and that should be really handy. And obviously you can ask questions as well at the end. Finally, if you haven't already, do please sign up for the New Zealand On Air GDSR newsletter. We'll be communicating with you as often as we can so that we can make sure the process is as easy as possible. We'll also be continuing to work closely with NZGDA, as Carl mentioned, and the team there to make sure that you're receiving updates via their communication channels as well, and vice versa. We also welcome any feedback and questions. All the questions, including any that we cover off today in this webinar, will go into an FAQ page that will soon sit on our website, and we'll be keeping that updated as well. But if you have any other questions or feedback that occurs to you a bit later, you can always email us at the email address there, gamesrebate@nzonair.govt.nz, and we'll be happy to help. Also, to come to our website is a glossary of terms that you can refer to whenever you need. And again, as Carl said, there'll soon be a dedicated GDSR section on the NZGDA website. So that's where, as he said, you'll have forms and this videos such as this webinar, as well as links to the NZ On Air website as well. So I'm sure you'll hear more about that in due course too, in terms of timing. So I'll just hand over now to Connell, because he will talk through the terms of trade and the letter of acknowledgement in more detail. Connell.
All the real fun stuff. Thanks, Suzanne. Kia ora koutou, katoa, ko Connell e tōku ingoa. So as Amy said earlier, I'm the Business Affairs Advisor at New Zealand On Air. So kind of lead a lot of our contracting in the screen space, but have been roped into the GDSR team at New Zealand On Air to kind of help out with some of the more legal type documents. So I'm just going to quickly run through the two documents that are referred there at the bottom of the slide. So firstly, there's the terms of trade document, and this document is found on the GDSR section of our website and is one of the key legal documents in the scheme. And we expect all registered games development organisations, and then those organisations who subsequently apply to the scheme, to be actively aware of this document and the various pieces that make it up. We've tried to balance the need for simplicity against our risk profile as a public funder and government entity. So we haven't aimed or intended to make it too overbearing for businesses that are registering or applying, but as you'll see, when you look at this document, it might come across as somewhat legalistic or quite detailed at times, but these are key areas that do need to be covered in that level of detail. And so in formulating these terms in what is a relatively short time frame, we've drawn on New Zealand On Air's usual funding policies and positions, and have also looked at certain aspects of how the screen rebate in Aotearoa is administered, and in addition have also looked at some relevant areas the Aussies have covered in their kind of T's and C's sections of their various gaming rebates. The terms of trade document is separated into three areas. Unfortunately, I don't have it to share right now. And due to the time of the session, we don't really have time to go through it in detail. But the three key areas are the general terms, the registration specific terms, and the application specific terms. The general terms are exactly kind of what they say they are, which are overarching terms that relate to the scheme, relate to all businesses connected to the scheme at any stage, and kind of broad acknowledgements and rights that New Zealand On Air has, such as RNC being subject to the Official Information Act, our right to publish the names of successful applicants and eventually the amounts those applicants receive, and our right to ask questions of all businesses seeking to both register and apply under the scheme. The registration and application specific terms largely mirror each other and cover various bits and pieces of the scheme, including various guarantees and acknowledgements businesses must make at these different stages, obligations to inform New Zealand On Air of other government funding support, obligations to inform New Zealand On Air of material changes to your business, which include liquidation or insolvency proceedings, or a change of ownership or structure, and New Zealand On Air's right to, at its own cost, conduct an independent spot audit, assessment, or assurance of a registered or successful businesses' accounting systems to ensure they are meeting or have met the various financial requirements of the scheme. So what I would recommend, sorry, that's a very kind of top line overview of this document, but what I would recommend is having a read through the document. And if you have any questions after that, please fire them through to me or the Games Rebate email address, and they'll find their way to me, and we'll deal with them as they come through, and we can discuss them over the phone or over Teams or Zoom, or just simply over email. And in case any shorter questions get sent into the chat during this session, hopefully we'll have time to answer any, provided that they aren't hugely detailed. Also wanted to note, similar to how Amy has done earlier, that over the coming weeks, as the needs of the scheme become clearer and questions potentially get asked, we may look to change, expand, or narrow these terms depending on whether and what things arise, and we'll be communicating any material changes to those terms to the sector via our usual comms channels. And the second document, which thankfully is quite a bit lesser in detail, is a letter of acknowledgement. And Amy talked about this before. It's not dissimilar to how the provisional certificate step works in the administration of the New Zealand Screen Production Rebate. We're actually still working through the format of this letter, but essentially this letter is provided to businesses whose registration under the GDSR is successful and has been approved, and acts somewhat as a green light to say that at the moment we don't have any concerns and you are subject to the guidelines and the terms of trade for the scheme. Welcome to submit a final application at the end of the eligibility period. That's all from me. So just wanted to broadly thank you all for taking the time today to come to this session. I know that we're all really looking forward to working with you as part of the scheme, and am now going to throw back to Amy.
Thanks, Connell. And that's actually that last note around updating of the terms of trade. Suzanne mentioned this, but we wanted to highlight and call out the fact that because we're moving at pace and because we genuinely want to be responsive to the sector, I think the reality is that especially in the first year, hopefully less so after year one, there will be some periodic updates to some of these really key documents, and we will do our absolute best endeavours across those channels we've just talked about: newsletter, NZGDA section of the website, our section of the website. So I really do implore you to subscribe to the newsletter in particular, because it'll be the first and primary place where we're able to send a note out saying we've updated the general guidelines, and then within the general guidelines document, and we'll do the same with the terms of trade, we'll have a table up top. So again, it's a shorthand for you to see, okay, there's been an update in the last week, and these are the key areas that have been added. So we really recommend, it's kind of helpful in some ways that there's the two key moments in time at the general registration point and then final application. Just really recommend that you make sure you're revisiting these key documents and just ensuring you're okay with any of those changes that have come through. I saw Sarah Box, I think, has joined as one of the attendees, and it's a big shout out to MB, because we're still working very closely with her and Lucas and the team, and they've actually provided some great updates just recently on some of those published documents. So I think it's likely we'll do an update to these documents week after next. We'll get some feedback from the webinar. We're having ongoing conversations, and then we'll provide quite a fulsome update of any changes as well. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, so everybody was aware that certainly in year one, bear with us, because we're trying to sort of iterate, much like game methodology. We're trying to prototype and get feedback and iterate and kind of keep it moving and hopefully making it really fit for purpose for the sector.
Can I just add, Amy?
Yeah.
Amy, sorry, I was just going to say, and that just to be sure everybody knows, the link to that GDSR newsletter will be in any of the communications we send through. It's at the bottom, and it's also on the obviously on the funding page itself. But it should hopefully be pretty clear how to link up to that.
Thanks, Suzanne. And I'll hand across to Luke now to talk through some of the financial information piece.
Kia ora everyone. I'm Luke, so I'm one of the assistant accountants here at New Zealand On Air. And we're going to be talking about some financial information, which, before I start, I just want to kind of say that this is a massive topic in itself, and we could probably do an entire webinar just on eligible expenditure and all these sorts of things.
I think we will, Luke. I think we will.
And that's probably to come in the future. So please bear with us because we don't have 100% of all the answers right now. But the slide we're looking at now is an extract from one of the key documents that Suzanne was mentioning earlier, which is the financial information required in eligible expenditure. One of the key points here I want to highlight, which is kind of especially relevant for the first year, is that the first stage will be estimated eligible expenditure. And a lot of questions we have is, what about periods where you don't have, financial statements or something for, say, the first 6 months if you're on a different financial year to how the scheme operates? And I just want to say that we will be allowing management reports and projections to be used instead in place of this. But please be sure to kind of provide a rationale or explanation for any projections you have, which will help us to determine eligibility. And also worth mentioning that for the final application, we do expect to see actual expenditure. So any projections or estimations will need to be replaced with actuals. I also want to bring everyone's attention to the personnel information. This might be a bit of work for applicants in preparation for the final application. Especially in cases where if you have employees that don't spend 100% of their time on game development activities and you want to apportion this time, then that's absolutely fine. But again, we just need a rationale or explanation on how you concluded the amount that you've assigned to that. Like I said, this is something we want people to start thinking about now, especially if you're not on a timesheet basis. The point being here that kind of any evidence that we receive will be good to begin with, and then we can start to maybe see trends or issues. We can address that in the future, as there might be a better way for us collecting this information. And another thing is the format of the financial information. We are leaving this slightly open-ended so that companies can present their expenses, in the same way they would to anyone else if they have, accounting software or whatever they use. So if they're similar to what you would give to someone like IRD or investors or something like that. The important thing is that we can determine that the cost of eligible game development activities performed in relation to eligible games. So if your financial statements and management accounts show this, then that's fantastic. The other piece is that if you have non-eligible games, so if you're a company that is creating games that maybe have gambling or other non-eligible games, that is also listed in on the website under the GDSR. There is information about what the business eligibility as well as the eligible costs. But if you do have non-eligible games and you don't track costs on a project basis, then you may need to highlight or split out any costs associated to non-eligible games, and it will be up to the applicants to show what amounts are on non-eligible games compared to eligible games. And finally, I know a lot of people have questions around independent assurance, and I can assure you that this is definitely at the front of our minds. To put it simply, we just need to do a bit more work in this space before we can put a process in front of you. We're very mindful of the time pressure challenges, especially at that time of the year with auditing. But we just don't have the answers to that just yet. So please bear with us, but we should hopefully have something forming in the next few weeks, and we'll be sure to include that in a newsletter or even perhaps another webinar, which we can go more in depth into the financial information. But yeah, the big things is that this document has a list of eligible expenses and as well as some specifically includes non-eligible expenses. But if there are any, further questions to that, then you can reach us through the Games Rebates inbox. So yeah, keep it brief and pass back to Amy.
Thanks, Luke. So Christina and I are going to hoof it through the portal and the grants forms, I think, so that we can, but we did think it was important just to step those of you who might not have checked the website out and looked at the form yet. We just wanted to step you through it. So Christina, I'll let you kick off and I'll jump in.
Hey, kia ora. I'm Christina. I'm the Corporate Services Coordinator here at New Zealand On Air. I'm likely to be your first point of contact if you send an email through to the inbox or if you call the phone with any questions. And as Amy says, I think the funding portal it's relatively straightforward, but it's always good to have a visual, and there's a couple of wee little things we want to be clear about. So this page that we're looking at here is the very first step of putting your registration in or your application in. So the first thing that you might notice is we call it the funding portal. I guess a more accurate name now might be the funding and rebate portal. We're using it for the same thing. So just as long as you can see, are you applying for a funding or a rebate, you're in the right place. The first thing that you'll need to do is create an account, and you can see the little screenshot there. It's pretty simple. You just need to make sure that you have verified that you're a New Zealand entity, and also that you agree to the terms and conditions, of course. And once you've done that, you can head into the first page of the registration itself. So probably the most important thing here is in the wee little red box, you can see that you need to select who you're applying on behalf of. And you can see there are a couple of different options there. Please just make sure that you are selecting GDSR applicant general registration. That is the one that's the one you want, basically. If you select the wrong one and you go ahead and fill out the form, then unfortunately you will probably have to go back and do it all again. So that's really important. And then you can see in the box below, there's a little mention of the pilot phase here, which is not going to apply to the vast majority of people watching this. And I think Amy might touch on that a little bit.
And we've hopefully managed to canvass most of the applicants who are likely to meet the eligibility threshold to go through into the pilot phase. But yeah, Christina's right. We just wanted to try and highlight for people to kind of keep an eye. If you are trying to apply for the pilot phase, just to keep an eye on what box that you're ticking there, because it's a slightly different process to go through with the pilot phase. Yeah. Brilliant. And then the next slide, just for most people, just making a note here that we needed to gather information around business and company structure. I think the majority of applicants will be ticking other, which will be that you're a private company, but there will be a few who are either a subsidiary of a head company or the head company, or possibly a service provider. You can tick multiple ones that apply to you as a business. So the key point here was that there is currently, in terms of the guidelines and eligibility, a cap on $3 million is the most that a company can access across the year. And so we were wanting to just ensure there was no double dipping across subsidiaries and head companies. But again, it will not apply to everybody. And if it's something that you need more clarity on beyond what's already in the guidelines, just come and talk to us, because we're happy to talk through that a little bit more. Equally, Luke's kind of mentioned this, I think, but we do ask you to put in what the timeframes are for your company's financial year. I think that's going to be very beneficial for us gathering that information. There's quite a lot of overlapping financial timeframes. The key one for everybody to hold in their minds is the 1st of April to 31st March eligibility period for the GDSR. That's essentially the GDSR's financial year for eligible expenditure. But of course, there are multiple timeframes crossing over for different companies. So letting us know early what you're working to just helps us hold that in our minds when we're having conversations with you. And wanted to just also be clear to people that there are a couple of fields in the general registration form asking for data that sort of caveats at the time of registration: how many full-time employees, how many part-time employees. This is data that you'll probably have to fill in again at the final application stage. The reason for us doing this is it's one of the key metrics and measures around success of the rebate on a kind of broader level. So obviously wanting this rebate to deliver to the goals of enhancing and building out the games sector in New Zealand, higher wage growth, higher job opportunities and employment. So it's just to let you know, we're trying to gather that data to create the baseline in year one. and shouldn't really need to be out there, but actually this week, first time in 5 years that I've been on the job, that an applicant submitted an application or filled it in and didn't hit submit, and only realised 4 weeks into the funding round. So I just wanted to be explicit that you need to hit the submit details button at the end. You will receive an email confirmation. So if you don't get an email confirmation, check that you've hit submit, and if not, come back to us, because we wouldn't want anyone to fall through the gaps. And I will pass to Wei Ping to talk about oversight and monitoring briefly.
Name is I be hoping in this to financial institutions or stage of
Sorry to interrupt, Wei Ping, your audio is dropping in and out a little bit. Can you try?
I will bring my microphone up closer.
Okay.
Hear me better?
I think maybe taking your microphone out might help. Sorry.
Can you hear?
Yeah, that's better.
I'll turn the volume up.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Yeah. Thank you, Amy. My name is Wei Ping. I will be working with Leducq very closely in the areas related to assessing financial informations, and also the areas related to independent assessments and arranging for engage with external audit for the audit assurance. So as everyone knows, GDSR is a financial incentive offered by the New Zealand government to game developers. The GDSR aims to minimize compliance cost. It operates on a high trust model with the sector. So in managing and monitoring the games rebate, New Zealand need to have a robust system in place to ensure the process is transparent. We want to emphasize that we will use the spot audit as risk mitigation strategy to ensure a high level of rigor is applied to ensure the no taxpayers' monies are misapplied, and that's very important to us. We will select applications for spot audit to assess the accuracy, integrities, and compliance to the Games Rebates guide, according to the guidelines. And the focus of spot audit will be on ensuring all financial information and supporting documents provided by you reflect the accuracy of your application and rebates you receive from us. So and we would like to ensure the Games Rebate is generous and fast processing, as you probably already noticed. We will put a lot of emphasis on early stage of application, and that would really help us a lot of work later on. As mentioned by Amy or Leducq at their previous slide explaining the statement of readiness, having this statement of readiness, it really will help us, and give us an early indication of the quality of applications we would expect to receive. And they also help us to prioritize, for the spot audit selection. So this spot audit, it will mainly be done by external independent audit firms, which New Zealand Air would engage with directly, and the cost will be bear by New Zealand Air. Okay, and then the selection process, I think this we will probably mention about in the later stage. Yeah. So is there anything that Amy would you like to?
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Wei Ping. I think for now that's great.
Thank you. And so I will hand back to Suzanne.
Actually, it's me briefly again, and I'm doing a lot of talking. I'll keep it short, but this is just putting the slide up around, this is stated in the guidelines, so people will probably be aware, but there are a lot of wonderful pre-existing government funding grants and opportunities around game development in existence already. And it's just to acknowledge that they're great and they should continue and they can work alongside the GDSR. And the only thing to note is that we will just be asking applicants at that second general registration phase to acknowledge if they are applying for or have received other government funding grants within a relative time period, because the key principle here is just that there's no double dipping happening across expenditure in multiple government schemes. So it's to just let you know that we'll be asking you to indicate if you are receiving any other grants, and this is just a snapshot of some we know that are in existence. There will likely be others, and there'll be an ability we'll make sure we as NZ On Air are working alongside the other agencies to ensure that we are cross-referencing and checking that there's no double dipping. And lastly, Suzanne, landing on accreditation.
Yes, so accreditation. In terms of accreditation, so this is something that we're still finalising in terms of the exact details. But the key thing to mention to you is that there will be a minimum requirement for accreditation. So we would see this most likely being an accreditation in the game credits, and also accreditation of the support of the scheme within your business or game website. The key thing really to remember there is that by adding this accreditation, it's a key way to build awareness within the sector of the fact that the rebate is available. The optimum would be accreditation in the loading screen of your game, but ultimately we're still working through, as I say, the finer details of the whole accreditation piece. So it's basically what is reasonable and feasible. So we would encourage you to come and talk to us if you want to discuss the options that would work best for you. In terms of the language that we would imagine should be used in accreditation, this would be something along the lines of, as you see there, made with the support of the Game Development Sector Rebate through New Zealand here. As I've noted there as well, we are also open to creative ideas. So if you have ways you think you could achieve this accreditation, just for an example for you, on the screen funding side of New Zealand On Air, the children's show Kitty and Lou, they put together an animated version of our New Zealand On Air logo for their upcoming feature film. So if you feel that you'd like to add our logo in a different way, we'd be really happy to have that conversation with you and to celebrate that. Finally, once again, we're really open to feedback as to what you think would work best for the sector in terms of accreditation around the rebate. That kind of information is really helpful for us. It's really key that we work together to ensure that we do this in a way, as I say, that recognises what's feasible and what's reasonable, but also what will help to promote to the wider sector that the rebate is here and is available. So that's it from me, and I think that's also the end of the presentation, unless Amy has anything to add. So perhaps we go back to you, Carl, I think, for questions.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I thought there would be a lot more questions, to be honest, in the chat, but I have a feeling that, there's probably some personal information that people probably don't want to just put out publicly. So yeah, anyone that might have questions, the email is on screen, gamesrebate@newzealandonair.govt.nz. So definitely reach out there if you want to go into more details, specific details around your studio. That line will always be open. I have a quick so if I was to get funding from Callaghan Innovation in the 2022 financial year, let's say 2024, and then for 2025, would it be possible for me to apply for the sector rebate through New Zealand On Air? Would there be any issues with that?
You would be eligible to apply for both within the same kind of whatever the financial eligibility period is. The key thing is just that you cannot be claiming the same eligible expenditure across both schemes. So that's really the key principle here. It's just to make applicants aware that if you are doing both and it's concurrent, that is absolutely fine, as long as you're very clear in your submission into GDSR that you're not counting any of those costs that you are then receiving under another scheme.
Great. Yeah, so if you have any questions, we'll be able to answer them for the next 5 minutes. I see some have already arrived, so just drop those down in the chat if you're interested. I also just want to shout out that you've included some of the photos from NZGDC, which is really cool to see some of the pictures featured there. So a question from Code, is the November 1st deadline a hard deadline if you're not sure if you'll cross the threshold?
So I think if I understand that correctly, and Code jump back in if I don't answer this clearly. So the 30th of November deadline is for you to register with us as an eligible business, and you will be giving an indication of estimated expenditure at that point. If what I'm reading correctly is you're not sure if you'll hit that 250,000 minimum eligible expenditure threshold come 31st of March, I think it's absolutely fine for you to have given us the indication that you think you will, even if you can't clearly state from previous years that you will be able to meet that. So I think that's the part where we are asking for estimated, and as Luke mentioned, kind of modelling or an indication of what you can demonstrate to us. Of course, if after that point, before the end of the eligibility period, you simply haven't met that 250,000 minimum eligible expenditure threshold, you can't put a final application in, if that makes sense.
Cool. Feel free to riff off that Code if you would like more information. Next question from Zoe. Question regarding the credits. Is there an expectation to have it in-game, in the in-game credits and the website, or just one or the other? For some games, e.g. mobile free-to-play, we don't always have credits.
Suzanne, do you want me to jump in on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just imagining that if there is a scenario, like we were saying, where it's not possible to have both of those, then that would be a conversation to come and have with us. We do absolutely recognise there's not necessarily one size fits all with this. That's right. Yeah, as I say, probably the answer is come and talk to us.
Cool. Next question. On the financial submission, is it likely that audited financial statements will be necessary for prior financial years?
Luke, do you want to jump in on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I guess for the eligible expenditure the estimated eligible expenditure at the start of the process, we would probably ask to have prior years information. If you've never had it audited before, then we're not going to ask you to go and get your prior year's stuff audited. If you have had it audited before, then that's great. It might, and when we get to the final application stuff, we'll be more focused on assurance around expenditure within the eligibility periods, not really outside of that. Hopefully that helps.
Next question from Sam. Parent and subsidiary. It's a bit unclear if the parent should be the one applying or if the subsidiary can be the one. In our case, that's such a challenging word. Subsidiary is the operational company directly paying costs and meets all rights, requirements, etc. So any policies on that?
Yeah, I think this is an area where we have put information into the general guidelines, but I do think we've had a couple of subsequent queries. So we're going to go away, I think, and firm up that language. And I think that'll go into the update. The key thing, I think, just to note here is all we're really keen to understand is an easy way for us as the funder to know whether or not the structure of your company encompasses head company and subsidiary, and either if both are applying within that $3 million cap or if only one is. So it's really a matter of us just being able, we have currently stated that what we are hoping for is that the parent company is the one that we have that acknowledged in the registration form with the subsidiary listed, but if it's the subsidiary that's claiming the funding and those financial documents are all pertaining to that, that's absolutely fine. So I think what we'll do is we'll go back and have a relook at that wording so that it's really crystal clear to the applicant what we're asking, because we don't really have a huge issue if it's either or. The key thing we're just trying to avoid is that there is more than $3 million being asked essentially of one company, be it head company and subsidiary. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Next question, and there's quite a few coming in, so we'll just see how much time we have. We might have to cut it and then direct you to the FAQ where we'll collect these and paste there. But we'll see how much we can get through in the next few minutes. Corey says, is it acceptable or advisable for an applicant to produce their own statement of readiness, or must this be assurance from a third party, and will more details on what this entails be finalized soon?
Yes, it's a great question, and it's the latter that we want to finalise the details. I think we're trying to work through those two options. I think from a probity perspective, there's usefulness in NZ on air or us commissioning an external third party to do the statement of readiness review, because ultimately the information we're seeking at that stage is really to benefit NZ on air's ability to know meaningfully if a company might need some additional support. So if the company is kind of signing its own report card and being like, no, we're fine, that's probably not going to give us the quality of information we need to know that actually that's an applicant who's probably got some gaps in their reporting processes and could do with a bit more guidance, templates, support to wrap around them. But whether it's NZ on air specifically doing that from our internal team, or we're working with, say, it's a third party, that's the part we're still just trying to lock down.
Thank you. Next question from Anthony. If our initial application is declined, is there an opportunity to talk about it and appeal?
Definitely to talk about it. I think the process around appeal can be a challenging one based on the timeframes we're working to. So I think what I would say is that we're going to operate on a highly communicative basis with applicants, and what we would be wanting to provide is clear rationale as to why an application might be declined. But I think we acknowledge that there needs to be a process where we can go back and forth on that. It's just incredibly challenging with the timeframes. If a final application gets declined, the ability to appeal within the financial year based on the appropriation and funding we have, I think we'll run into challenges. So again, it's probably an area we need to just put a little bit more thought into, and then we'll absolutely make the sector clear how that will work.
Thank you. Couple questions from Jules. Is this open to individual game developers?
Yes, but you have to meet the minimum eligible expenditure threshold at your final application stage, but yes.
And that's $250,000. Next question, are there any restrictions to the type of game genre that would qualify? In my case, I'm looking at something that is about teaching some Māori language and culture and our green New Zealand image via simple scroller game.
I just would refer you to the general guidelines. There's a clear section that came from the initial work that MB did in consultation with the sector. There's some really clear and specific parameters around eligibility of games and genres that you can refer to.
Thank you. Question from Robert. Could there be any issues if a satellite studio subsidiary of a foreign company applies, the subsidiary being based in New Zealand?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I think as long as the subsidiary is domiciled in New Zealand and applying for eligible expenditure based on the definitions, that's absolutely fine.
So if it's owned,
Yeah, that's what I believe as well. As long as the subsidiary that's based in New Zealand is the one that's applying. What we haven't quite figured out is the work around intercompany transactions and what happens when that company is offshore. But I think we've now got a bit more of an idea on that. So if you have any questions around that specifically, please email us.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That wraps it up. So I'm going to cut the chat. I'm going to stop looking at it in case any questions do come through. But thank you. We managed to get a few nice ones in there at the end. So thank you those that asked any questions. I want to give New Zealand On Air a big thank you for just your openness and willingness to share and bring the community into the conversation as this is being developed. I'm really just excited about how the next few years is going to go as the industry matures and we get the sector rebate rolling. So thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to the next one. As mentioned at the beginning, the nzgda.com/GDSR URL is going to house all of the information that's shared over the coming months and onwards. There's an email on screen, gamesrebate@newzealandonair.govt.nz. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose the New Zealand On Air team, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself or anyone else on the call if you have any questions. And yeah, it's been a really insightful discussion. Thank you so much. I'm going to close off the webinar with a karakia, and then we can go and enjoy the rest of the evening. So Unihia, unihia, unihia ki te uru tapunui, kia watia, kia mama, te nakau te titana, te wairua i te ara takata, koia ra e rongo, whakaira ake ki runga, kia tina, tina, huie, takie. Really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Kau.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Carl.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.